Have you ever felt completely lost trying to navigate a complex system, especially when something really crucial like your own health or your job is on the line? It feels like trying to untangle a really, really dense knot, only the stakes are just so much higher. Well, today we're going to dive deep into one of those incredibly important and often pretty complex systems, the Office of Workers' Compensation Programs, or OWCP. And our focus specifically for you listening is on federal agency employees and also civilian contractors. We've pulled together quite a stack of source material for this. It's a collection of real critical questions submitted by people just like you. We're talking folks from agencies like the USPS, TSA, FBI, IRS, even the National Forestry Service and the Bureau of Prisons. Plus, we've got insights for civilian contractors working abroad, too. So our mission today, it's really to unpack these burning questions. We want to pull out the essential insights and give you a much clearer picture of your rights and, well, the processes involved when a work injury or illness happens. Because honestly, this knowledge isn't just academic. It's about empowering you, helping you avoid common mistakes, and really confidently getting the benefits you deserve. Okay, let's unpack this.
Absolutely. And we're aiming to go beyond just, spitting out answers. The goal here is to give you the context, the deeper implications behind everything, so you really understand not just what to do, why it's so important, and how it all fits together for your well-being, your career, your long-term security.
Okay, let's jump right in then. We've got some questions here that, well, they seem to trip people up quite a bit, coming straight from our listeners at the USPS. One letter carrier told us the injury paperwork is just incredibly confusing. Specifically, figuring out the difference between the traumatic injury forms and the occupational disease forms. They've heard even a seemingly minor mistake on a CA1 or a CA2 form can just trigger a claim denial. So what are some of those maybe less obvious but common mistakes postal workers or really any federal employee make when filing? And maybe more importantly, how can they achieve that critical precision to avoid those pitfalls?
That is such a crucial point. And you're right, many claims fail, not because the injury isn't legitimate, but because the description of how it happened is just too vague or incorrect. Probably the most common mistake is not clearly distinguishing between a traumatic injury, that's a specific event, specific time, specific place, and an occupational disease, which, develops gradually over time. Repetitive stress, exposure, that sort of thing. The forms are different, as you mentioned. CA1 for traumatic, CA2 for occupational disease, filing the wrong one, or not providing enough detail linking the work directly to the injury on either form. Yeah, that can absolutely lead to denials. When we talk precision, think of it like this. Imagine your claim is a story you're telling to someone who's pretty skeptical. Every detail, every specific action, how it directly led to the injury, that's all vital evidence.
That's a really powerful way to put it. Okay. And sticking with those forms, postal employees also talk a lot about continuation of pay, or COP. They often know they might be able to get a pay if they're hurt, but what are the exact mechanics? And maybe what's the single most important thing USPS workers need to do to qualify so they don't have to just burn through their own sick leave?
Right, COP. So COP is a benefit that's unique to traumatic injuries, which means you absolutely must file a CA1 form. And the single most important action, filing that CA1 within 30 days of the injury happening, that 30-day mark. It's not just, some arbitrary deadline. It's a critical strategic advantage. If you miss it, you don't just lose out on potentially up to 45 calendar days of your full regular pay without touching your own leave. It can sometimes actually make your whole claim harder to prove down the line. Delays often raise questions about whether the injury was really work-related. And remember, if you file late, or if it's an occupational disease claim on a CA2, you just wouldn't be eligible for COP at all.
Okay, that 30-day window is key. Unfortunately, we've also heard concerns from USPS workers about, unsupportive supervisors, or even bosses trying to pressure people not to file claims, or maybe dragging their feet on the necessary paperwork. What can a postal employee actually do if they feel like management is retaliating or, obstructing their OWCP claim? Are there specific protections in place? And how are they enforced?
Yeah, this is a significant issue, and thankfully, yes, federal employees do have strong protections against this. It is absolutely illegal for supervisors to discourage, delay, or retaliate against an employee for filing an injury claim, period. If you experience this, the very first step is document everything meticulously. Dates, times, names, exactly what was said or done. Keep a log, then report it. You can go to a higher level manager, talk to your union rep if you have one, or even report it directly to OWCP. Agencies are legally required to comply with OWCP regulations, and obstructing a claim is a serious violation. It can lead to internal disciplinary action against that supervisor.
Good to know there are avenues. And one last thing for our postal workers they've mentioned,
It can be really tough in some areas to find a doctor who will even handle a federal workers' comp case. Seems like because of OWCP red tape. Correct? So if their regular doctor says no, they won't take their OWCP claim, what should they do? Any tips on finding a willing provider? And maybe more importantly, ensuring that doctor's report includes the right details, like that crucial link between the work accident and the injury to satisfy OWCP.
Uh-huh. This is a very common and frankly frustrating challenge. If your primary care physician won't handle OWCP, you definitely need to find one who will. OWCP actually has a directory of approved providers you can check online or, ask fellow federal employees who've been through it. Word of mouth can be really powerful here. Now, the key for OWCP isn't just any doctor's report. It needs to explicitly establish that direct causal link or nexus between the work incident or exposure and your diagnosed condition. The report has to detail the specific mechanism of injury and explain precisely how your work duties contributed to it. Without that clear, well-articulated link, even with a completely valid injury, the claim is, highly vulnerable to denial.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift gears now from the post office to the airport front lines. Our next set of questions comes from TSA officers. They face their own unique physical demands, obviously. Officers there are constantly lifting heavy luggage, standing for long hours. So if a TSA employee throws out their back in one sudden incident versus maybe developing back pain over months of that repetitive lifting, would they handle the OWCP claim differently? How should a TSA employee know whether to file that traumatic injury claim or an occupational disease claim? And what are the immediate first steps either way?
Right. This is exactly where that CA1 versus CA2 distinction we talked about becomes absolutely critical again. A sudden incident, like throwing out your back, lifting a specific heavy bag at a specific moment that's clearly a traumatic injury, needs a CA1. But developing back pain over months or years from all that repetitive lifting, bending, standing that's classic occupational disease, that requires a CA2. Regardless of the type, though, the very first step for any injury is report it. Report it to your supervisor as soon as possible, ideally within 24 hours if you can. Then get appropriate medical attention and make sure your doctor understands from the get-go that it's a work-related injury.
Right. Report first, then medical.
Yeah.
Okay. We also hear about TSA agents getting injured during security incidents, maybe dealing with an unruly passenger or, tragically, sometimes in airport attacks. If a TSA officer is hurt or even traumatized in a serious on-duty incident like that, what should they know about the OWCP process? Are there any sort of special considerations for injuries coming from workplace violence or terror-related events?
Sure. For injuries that stem from workplace violence or terror-related events, the claims process under FECA, the Federal Employees Compensation Act, is essentially the same as for any other federal job injury. You'd still follow the standard OWCP process: immediate reporting, filing the right form, likely a CA1 if it's a sudden event, and getting medical care. The unique consideration here really lies heavily in the documentation. You need to make absolutely sure that police reports, internal incident reports, any witness statements, all of that gets included to thoroughly back up the circumstances. It's crucial to paint a complete objective picture of what happened. And it's important to note psychological injuries from events like these, like PTSD, they also fall under OWCP coverage, though they often face, additional scrutiny, which we can maybe talk more about.
Yeah, let's actually talk about that now. Speaking of psychological injuries, let's turn to the FBI. Obviously, law enforcement work can be incredibly traumatic. So if an agent develops PTSD or maybe severe anxiety after a critical incident, can they file an OWCP claim for a mental health condition? And what would you say is the single biggest hurdle an FBI employee might face in getting a psychological injury claim accepted, especially in such a sensitive job? How do they overcome that?
Yes, absolutely. OWCP does cover mental health injuries that are caused or significantly aggravated by work. This is highly relevant for high-stress jobs like the FBI, no question. The biggest hurdle, as I alluded to, is definitely the extra scrutiny compared to physical injuries. It's just a higher bar to clear, frankly. To get a psychological injury claim accepted, an agent needs compelling objective evidence that clearly links the condition to specific workplace incidents or maybe extraordinary cumulative work factors, not just general stress. This means detailed medical reports, usually from a psychiatrist or psychologist, outlining the diagnosis and its explicit work-related cause. Psychological evaluations are often needed, and documentation of the specific critical incidents or conditions that led to the mental health issue is vital. Personal statements, witness statements, anything else that corroborates the objective work-related stressors, it all helps build the case.
Okay, so objective evidence is key there. Let's shift now to maybe a more typical office setting, like the IRS. We had a listener ask if they developed really bad wrist pain from just nonstop computer use, say carpal tunnel syndrome. Can a gradual injury like that actually be covered by OWCP even though there wasn't one single accident? What does an IRS employee need to show specifically to prove that a repetitive strain injury is work-related when there's no single, smoking gun incident?
Oh, absolutely. Gradual injuries like carpal tunnel syndrome, things that develop over time from repetitive motion, they are definitely covered. They're considered occupational illnesses or diseases. For this, you'd file a CA2 form. Since there isn't that single incident, the key evidence you need is proof of a clear, direct causal link between your specific job duties and the condition. This means getting very detailed medical reports from your physician explaining exactly how your specific tasks like extensive typing, data entry, whatever it is, caused or significantly aggravated the carpal tunnel. You'll also need to document, the duration and the nature of that exposure, maybe mention any ergonomic assessments or changes that were made or maybe not made in the workplace. It's really about proving the cumulative effect of your specific work environment and duties.
Got it. IRS employees also sometimes deal with really intense workloads and sadly, sometimes even threats from angry taxpayers. So if stress from the job just becomes overwhelming, or maybe they develop anxiety because of a specific hostile incident, could that potentially be a workers' comp claim? And what's the line, in OWCP's view, between just general job stress, which probably isn't covered, and work-induced anxiety or stress that could be?
Right. Similar to our FBI discussion, work-induced stress and anxiety can certainly be covered by OWCP, but there's a distinction. The challenge, and the line you're asking about, often comes down to proving that the stress goes significantly beyond the normal stresses of employment for that particular job. OWCP is more likely to consider claims where stress arises from extreme work conditions or specific hostile incidents that are objectively outside the usual pressures. Things like direct threats or a single traumatic event. Again, documentation is paramount. Detailed medical reports from mental health professionals diagnosing the condition and explicitly linking it to identifiable objective work stressors are needed. Records of the incidents themselves, maybe threat reports, internal agency documents, and potentially witness statements help too. It's really about demonstrating objective stressors that a reasonable person would find overwhelming, not just, general job dissatisfaction or typical deadline pressures.
Okay, that distinction is important. Now, leaving the office environment, let's head outdoors to the National Forestry Service. Injuries there often happen in pretty challenging remote settings. The listener asks, if they get injured deep in the field, maybe during a wildfire operation or a backcountry patrol, and they just can't report it or file forms immediately, what should they do? OWCP wants immediate reporting, we know that, but that might just not be feasible way out there. Does OWCP make any specific allowances for delayed reporting given the nature of their work?
Yes, that's a very practical and critical concern for anyone working in the field. And the answer is yes, they do make allowances. While OWCP generally expects reporting as soon as possible, ideally, supervisor notification within 24 hours, they do understand delays when circumstances make immediate reporting genuinely impossible, like being injured in a remote area with zero communication. The critical thing is to report the injury as soon as it becomes feasible. The absolute moment you have access to communication or you reach a location where you can safely report it. And documenting the specific reason for the delay is crucial when you do file. For example, you'd note, was in remote area X, no communication available until returning to base camp on Y date, at which point injury was reported immediately to Supervisor Z. The sooner you report once you're able, and the clearer your explanation for that unavoidable delay, the better off you'll be.
That's good practical advice. Now, some forestry jobs are extremely hazardous, and they can unfortunately leave lasting damage. Maybe hearing loss from loud equipment or a permanent knee injury after a bad fall. I've heard some people think these schedule awards are only for really major things, like losing an arm or a leg. Is that always the case? Or can even a slight but permanent loss of function potentially qualify? How do these awards work for, say, a National Forestry Service employee who suffers a permanent impairment to a body part?
That is a common misconception, and it's really important to clear this up. Schedule awards are a vital part of OWCP for any qualifying permanent impairment, not just major limb losses. If you sustain a permanent loss of use or function to a specific body part that's listed on OWCP's schedule, and that includes arms, legs, hands, feet, eyes, ears, yes, but also specific fingers, toes, or even just a measurable permanent limited range of motion in a joint, you may be entitled to a lump sum payment. This payment is in addition to any wage loss compensation you might have received while recovering. Your treating physician first has to determine that your medical condition has reached maximum medical improvement. Basically, it's as good as it's going to get. Then they assign an impairment rating using the specific AMA guides to the evaluation of permanent impairment. That rating, combined with your average weekly wage at the time of injury, determines the amount of the schedule award. It's meant to compensate for that permanent loss of function itself, not for pain or suffering. And typically, you pursue this once active medical treatment for the injury has wrapped up. So yes, even a permanently limited range of motion in, say, a finger, could potentially qualify for a schedule award.
Wow, that's a really important nugget of information. I think a lot of people might overlook that. Okay, let's switch gears again and address a whole different group. Civilian contractors. Are government contractors covered by anything like OWCP if they get hurt while working on federal projects? Specifically, thinking about a private contractor working on a U.S. military base overseas if they get injured, is it a completely different system from what we've been talking about for federal employees? A listener mentioned the Defense Base Act. How does that fit in?
Yes, this is a crucial distinction, and the short answer is yes. It's generally a completely different system for them. Direct federal employees, as we've discussed, are covered under FECA, administered by OWCP. Civilian contractors, though, especially those working overseas on U.S. military bases or under U.S. government contracts, are typically not covered by FECA. Instead, they fall under the Defense Base Act, or DBA. Now, the DBA is administered by a division within OWCP, the Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act division, but it operates as a distinct system from FECA. It essentially requires employers to provide workers' compensation insurance, usually through private insurance carriers, for their employees working on these overseas contracts.
Okay, so DBA, private insurance carriers. What unique challenges might civilian contractors face then when filing injury claims compared to direct federal employees under FECA? If a contractor gets injured in, say, a war zone or maybe on a USI project abroad, how is that claims process different, especially if they're dealing with these private insurance carriers? It sounds like it could be a much more, well, adversarial experience sometimes.
You're right, it certainly can be. The main difference is exactly that. Under DBA, you're usually dealing with a private insurance carrier, not directly with the federal government's OWCP system, like a federal employee under FECA. This often means different procedures, different forms, and yes, potentially more adversarial interactions with the insurance company adjuster. Contractors absolutely must ensure their employer has the required DBA insurance it's legally mandated for these kinds of overseas contracts. They should also be prepared for the possibility that insurance companies might dispute claims more aggressively, maybe require independent medical exams more often, and generally be quite focused on limiting payouts. So for contractors, it's incredibly critical to report injuries immediately, seek medical attention promptly, and be absolutely meticulous with all documentation. They're navigating a private insurance system, which might not feel as familiar or potentially as employee-friendly as the direct federal system.
Right, a whole different ball game there. Okay, finally, let's talk about the Bureau of Prisons, BOP. Prison employees obviously work in a very high-risk environment, and unfortunately, assaults by inmates are a leading cause of injuries. If a correctional officer is injured, say breaking up an inmate altercation, what's the absolute best way for them to document and file that OWCP claim to ensure it's, watertight, given those challenging circumstances?
For any workplace violence injury, especially in that kind of high-stakes environment, the documentation is just absolutely paramount. You cannot over-document. Beyond the standard immediate reporting to the supervisor and filing the CA1 form, DOP staff should ensure that all relevant internal incident reports are completed thoroughly and accurately reflect the sequence of events. Get it right the first time. Witness statements from fellow officers or other staff who saw what happened are extremely valuable, often critical in these cases. And, of course, any medical reports need to clearly and explicitly link the injury sustained directly to that assault incident. This comprehensive, corroborated documentation really helps establish the facts incontrovertibly and strongly supports the claim for OWCP benefits.
Makes sense. Now, a lot of corrections officers, and probably others in high-risk jobs, worry that getting hurt on the job, especially if it happens more than once, might somehow label them as unfit or hurt their career progression. Some might feel pressured, maybe subtly or not so subtly, to use their own leave or come back to work before they're fully ready because they fear losing their job if they take too much injury time. What specific protections do injured federal workers have against this kind of retaliation or stigma? And how robust are those protections in practice? Can the agency really just fire them or refuse to accommodate them if they need light duty?
This is a significant and completely understandable concern for many federal employees, certainly not just BOP staff. The good news is, federal employees are strongly protected against discrimination and retaliation, specifically for filing an OWCP claim. Agencies generally cannot fire an employee solely because they sustained a work-related injury or because they are out on OWCP receiving benefits. Furthermore, if an employee is ready to return to work but has medical restrictions, the agency is typically required by law to make reasonable efforts to offer a suitable light-duty position or accommodate those restrictions if such a position is available. They also generally have an obligation to hold your position for you while you recover, often for up to 1 year. If employees feel pressured, face stigma, or experience any form of retaliation, they absolutely should document it immediately and seek assistance through their union, through HR, or by contacting OWCP directly. The protections are there, but employees often need to be proactive in asserting their rights.
That is definitely reassuring to hear. Still, many injured workers get really frustrated by how long the OWCP process can sometimes take. We hear this a lot. A simple, clear-cut case might get decided in, say, 45 days, but more complicated claims can seem to drag on for months and months. If a BOP staff member, or anyone really, has been waiting a long time with no decision on their claim, what proactive steps can they actually take to try and push things forward? And what options do they have in the meantime, especially if they're stuck without income coming in?
It's true. Claims processing times can vary dramatically, and that waiting period can be incredibly stressful, especially financially. Simple, well-documented traumatic injury claims can sometimes be resolved relatively quickly. But complex claims, particularly occupational disease claims or those needing more investigation or additional medical evidence, can certainly take much longer, months, sometimes longer. If you're waiting, you can, and probably should, contact OWCP directly through their portal or phone system for a status update on your claim. Be persistent but polite. However, it's important to understand that OWCP generally doesn't provide temporary income while a claim is still pending and under review. This is precisely why understanding that continuation of pay, COP for traumatic injuries, is so incredibly critical. It provides that crucial pay buffer for the initial 45 days. If a claim is initially denied, or if COP runs out before a decision is made, or before you can return to work, employees may unfortunately need to rely on their own accrued sick or annual leave. Exploring options like sick leave donation programs, if available at their agency, or even looking into temporary disability retirement if the situation becomes prolonged and income is urgently needed, might be necessary. It really underscores the immense importance of getting that initial filing absolutely correct and complete to minimize delays right from the start.
Absolutely highlights that. Okay, one last question. This one about pre-existing conditions. Let's say an officer already had a bit of a prior knee or back problem before joining BOP. Then, an incident at work makes that old condition significantly worse. I've heard some people say that if you have any kind of pre-existing condition, you're just out of luck with workers' comp. Is that always the case? Or will OWCP still cover an injury that aggravates a pre-existing condition?
That's another very common concern, and thankfully it's mostly a misconception. It's crucial to understand this. FECA will absolutely cover a condition if work factors significantly aggravated, accelerated, or precipitated a flare-up of a pre-existing condition. It's not just about entirely new injuries caused 100% by work. This is a really important point for many federal employees who might have prior issues. The challenge, however, lies in proving that the work incident or exposure caused a significant aggravation, not just a minor or temporary worsening. You'll need clear, detailed medical evidence from your doctor explicitly stating that the specific work event or exposure worsened the pre-existing condition, and ideally, to what extent. The doctor's report should detail the nature of the pre-existing condition, how the specific work incident impacted it, and how that impact led to a new or increased level of disability or need for treatment. It's not about proving the condition was solely caused by work, but demonstrating that work was a substantial contributing factor that exacerbated the underlying problem to a compensable degree. So, to kind of synthesize the key takeaways from our deep dive today, the importance of accurate and timely claim filing just cannot be overstated, right? Understanding those crucial distinctions, traumatic injury needing a CA1, occupational disease needing a CA2, that's absolutely fundamental. Furthermore, the critical role of specific, detailed medical documentation, especially establishing that clear, articulate link between the work performed and the injury sustained, that is the absolute backbone of any successful OWCP claim. It's not just about being injured. It's about convincingly proving how and why it's work-related, down to the necessary details. We also really emphasize the vital protections that are available for you as federal employees against retaliation or, undue pressure from supervisors, or that fear of job loss if you're on leave or need accommodations like light duty. Remember, you have significant rights specifically designed to protect you in these situations. We also touched upon those unique considerations for mental health claims, things like PTSD, anxiety, stress from extreme work conditions, and clarified how even pre-existing conditions, if aggravated by work, can still be covered provided you have the right kind of medical evidence.
Yeah, and bringing it all back to you, the listener, really understanding these intricacies from those tight continuation of pay requirements, like nailing that CA1 filing within 30 days for traumatic injuries, to navigating what can be tricky doctor networks, and even understanding the potential for schedule awards if you have a permanent impairment. All of this is just absolutely crucial for securing the appropriate medical care and the compensation you rightfully deserve. And of course, for our civilian contractors listening, remembering that distinct path under the Defense Base Act, separate from direct federal employees under FECA. Knowing those differences can truly make or break the success of your claim and really impact your ability to just focus on healing.
Definitely. And given all the complexities and, frankly, the potential challenges we've discussed today, this raises an important question, I think, for you to consider moving forward. What might be the ultimate impact on long-term career resilience, on self-advocacy of federal employees and contractors being truly well-informed about the ins and outs of OWCP?
That is a powerful thought to leave you with. We really hope this deep dive has armed you with some essential knowledge and maybe a bit more confidence to navigate the OWCP system should you ever need to. Remember, being informed truly is your best defense and your greatest advocate. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.